Okay, welcome everyone to the third annual Global Health and Wellbeing Coaching Symposium brought to you by YourCoach. Really excited to be here today. I am Dr. Cherie Crow. I am the owner and CEO of Wellness Coaching Elevated. I help health and wellness coaches elevate their skills. And then I'm also the director of the master's program in health coaching at the Earl E. Bakken Center of Spirituality and Healing at the University of Minnesota. So excited to be here today. I'm currently teaching the course the business of health coaching. So it couldn't be perfect timing. And I'm very excited for our panelists. So I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves real quick, take a minute or so. And Barbara, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Barbara Zabawa. I am an attorney and owner of the Center for Health and Wellness Law. We are a law firm that specializes in assisting those who work within and for the wellness industry in various capacities, including a lot of health and wellness coaches. I also teach full-time at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the College of Health Sciences. And I have a lot of years of practicing law and teaching health and wellness law to various audiences, both at the academic institution level and in different venues for presentations. So excited to be here and talk about the legal and financial aspects of health and wellness coaching.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Charlie, you go next.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. My name is Charlie Hodson, and I'm with Senior Associates, development director here. We're based in Chicago. We're a small business. We've had about 20 years of experience in the mental health and wellness professional field. We have about 200,000 clients in the United States, and we're driven by our customer service and our technology, and really happy to be here and talk about the fun of insurance.
I love that. The fun of insurance. That's great. All right, Michael, you're up next.
Thank you. I look forward to being here. And Michael Carenti, I am a tax managing director with CBIZ. CBIZ is a national accounting firm. We have offices in over 36 cities throughout the U.S. I head up the Boston tax practice. We have a number of health clients here in related industries. And we have a number of clients throughout the U.S. that we help, whether it's tax or related matters, as well as accounting and accounting advisory services.
All right. Thank you, all three of you, for being here today. So we're talking today all things legal and finance. Woohoo! Get your party hats. But that being said, super important. So if we could just briefly go around, Barbara, we'll start with you. Why do you feel it's so important to protect yourself as a health and well-being coach?
Oh, well, let me count the ways. First of all, I want to thank YourCoach for being bold enough to include legal as part of their education series to coaches. One of my observations as a practicing lawyer in the wellness space is that it's often an afterthought, unfortunately. Still, and even a lot of the curriculum for health and wellness coaching certifications and other training programs for coaches, the legal side of things, if it's touched on at all, it's very brief. And so that's why I wrote the books that I've written, the Rules of Workplace Wellness Programs, and co-authored a legal book for fitness managers and exercise professionals. And the reason why we did it is because even though coaches are not technically licensed by any states, they still have exposure legally. One is they can exceed their scope of practice, which is very tempting and easy to do for a lot of coaches.
You bet.
They know they have a lot of experience. They have a lot to offer, which is why there's so many people gravitating to coaches for their health and wellness needs. But they have to be careful not to cross the line. There are actual lawsuits, not many, but there are some lawsuits, especially when you get into nutrition type coaching. There's a very active dietetics board association that is policing, if you will, where they still have some legal presence in some states.
Mhm.
making sure that their domain is protected. And so that you want to understand your boundaries, but you also want to make sure that you understand your role vis-a-vis your clients. So having the correct legal documents in order with the language that's going to most protect you as the coach, but also set the proper expectations for your clients so they understand what it is you're going to do for them and what you're not going to do for them. You're not going to replace their primary care provider or any other licensed healthcare provider. And your job is to refer when you run up against situations where a licensed provider may be more appropriate. So having those expectations in place will help reduce your risk of malpractice, and your insurance company, which I'm sure our insurance guest will comment on. Charlie will be happy to learn that you've set those proper expectations. And then you also want to be aware of your data. So what obligations you have as a health and wellness coach who probably is learning and maybe collecting some sensitive data about their clients, what your legal obligations are with respect to that data. It's not necessarily HIPAA, but sometimes it is. But there are also other state laws and other federal laws that you want to be cognizant of so that you aren't using or disclosing the data inappropriately. And if you happen to have some sort of breach, what do you do in those instances? So having proper policies and procedures in place can help protect you as a coach when it comes to data and just how you handle other individuals or your relations with companies or clients. Having those policies and procedures in place are also good ways of protecting you as a coach.
Okay, thank you very much. Charlie, why should we protect ourselves with insurance?
Yeah, and I would just really like to echo what Barbara was saying there. I feel like we may have shared notes somehow before this because you really hit the bullet points that I wanted to as well. And I actually ran a quick claim scenario. CPH has been in the health coaches field for about 5 years now, and there really hasn't been that many claims. About little less than 100 in 5 years, so that's great. And to really nail down what the claims are, Barbara is absolutely correct that it's mostly about working outside of your scope of practice. There's been some diagnoses that health coaches may try to dive into nutrition and medical diagnosis a little bit, or they're working in a clinical role like a psychologist or a counselor or a clinical social worker. So really that's the main claims that we've seen. And the reason malpractice is insurance is that I also ran what the meat claims payouts are on poor health coaches, and about $15,000 to $20,000. So it's not cheap. As Barbara, as an attorney, legal fees are not cheap. So it's important to have liability insurance to protect yourself because it's paid through the policy. Nothing's out of pocket, and running a small business, that can be a big expense. And I wanted to also remind you that through your coach portal, you can learn more about CPH insurance, and is just right in your there.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. And Michael, want to round us out?
Yeah, from a tax standpoint. So I agree with everything that Barbara and Charlie had to say, when it comes to legal and insurance, but then you need to, be compliant when it comes to taxes. And you're not only a coach, but you're also an entrepreneur, and you need to make sure that you're dealing with the taxes associated with being an entrepreneur, right? So we help clients all the time with income tax filings as well as payroll tax filings. Sometimes, even as a coach, you're providing services. Some states also, tax services from a sales tax perspective. So we can advise you on what the best method is to make sure that you're compliant with all of the different taxes that may sneak up on you. So we work on a regular basis, with the coaches, making sure that they're compliant with all the different types of taxes, meet with them regularly to advise them, and then also help them when it comes to invoicing and make sure the invoices are done correctly and it has the right type of, details on it so that it will pass muster from a tax standpoint. And, a lot of times the tax authorities will take a look at those invoices to make sure that all the proper taxes have been properly addressed. So we'll work with them to make sure that that's all addressed.
Great, fantastic, Michael. So I have an assignment in my class right now where I ask students to reflect on what do they fear about starting their own business. So in this scenario, I'm talking about someone who's just going to be a solopreneur and coach clients one-on-one or perhaps group coaching. So I asked, what do you fear? What are you really worried about? Because I just wanted to get a sense. And over 50% said they were completely daunted and paralyzed by all the legal, tax, finance information and not knowing where to start. So if you each can just say maybe a minute about what's the bare minimum someone needs, what's that checklist that someone needs to just get rolling and make sure they've protected themselves. So Charlie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so the bare minimum is really a $1 million policy. That's actually the bare minimum in most states requirements for at least licensed professionals, and health coaches are no different. $1 million policy is the standard, and it's really not that expensive. For if you're working under 24 hours a week, it's about $115 a year, and if you're hours a week, it's $200 for the year. So from a budget perspective, that's a way to keep in mind what an insurance policy would cost. But the $1 million policy is really what you should have. And unless you have any type of office space, professional liabilities.
Okay, great, thank you. And Michael.
Yeah, bare minimum from a tax perspective is just you making sure you have good books and records, right? So making sure that you're properly documented, the income that's coming in as well as the expenses that you have, so that we can create a good template to use to prepare your tax returns. If you're an entrepreneur or a sole proprietor, it's probably going to go on your individual return. But again, we need to make sure that we have that properly documented so that we can present it correctly and that you're presenting the right income to the tax authorities.
So it could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet.
Could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. That'll work as long as you have substantiation, right, on the numbers that are on that Excel spreadsheet. That'll work.
Okay, great. And Barbara.
So in addition to what Charlie and I'm sorry, Michael just said, I agree, and because I agree with those basics, I think from a legal perspective, having that services agreement with your clients is the core, especially for the solopreneurs, the core document that you're going to want before you start seeing clients. You're going to want the language that sets that expectation both for you and your client is part of your intake process, and a document that is signed before you start delivering services. So that document is going to cover things like what service you're offering, what services you're not offering, your scheduling policy, cancellation policy, your fee structure, what happens when people don't show up, what are your refund policies like, your waiver and limited of liability language about what you're willing to take responsibility for should something go wrong, which shouldn't be very much at all, and just some other ways of resolving any disputes should they occur, should be part of your services agreement. I also have a basic compliance checklist free on my website at wellnesslaw.com. If anyone is interested in downloading that.
Okay, thank you all very much. Great tips to get anyone started. Definitely sort of lessen that fear I was talking about earlier. It is scary because I've done it myself. So I side with the students for sure. It can be very scary, especially when you're not a business person, right? I hear that a lot from my students too. So in general, what can we get away with not having right out of the gate? I know that's a kind of touchy question, but I mean, truly, you only have so much money. So what can we get away with not having? Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing as you said, earlier when we were talking about the books and records, you can use Excel. You don't need to use, QuickBooks or go and spend money on accounting system when, an Excel spreadsheet will work until you keep growing. And as you grow, then we'll work with you. And that's what generally we do. We'll work with clients on when they need to go on to, an ERP system or some type of accounting system that's more than QuickBooks or more than an Excel schedule. But a lot of times the Excel schedule works as long as you have the supporting documentation. So instead of, spending money on an accounting system or even a tax preparation system, QuickBooks will, Excel will work until you need QuickBooks, and then we can help you with the tax filing. So I would say, just use your Excel for now and then, move on to something else as you grow.
Okay, thank you. And Barbara.
Well, assuming you decide to create a legal entity like a limited liability company, which is the most common form of legal entity that solo practitioners will create if they create one. You don't have to. You can just be a solo practitioner without any legal entity behind you. I don't recommend it because that legal entity does provide some insulation, some protection of your personal assets. But one thing you don't need necessarily when you create that legal entity is a lengthy operating agreement if it's just you and there's no one else involved in your company. The operating agreement is typically not filed with the state where you file your articles of organization. It's an internal document that is basically giving you some guidelines on how to govern your company. And that is really important when you have multiple people who are invested in the company. Because if someone leaves, you got to know what to do with their membership or share or units or whatever they're going to be called. And that isn't really needed when you're just by yourself. So you don't need to fall into that trap of, oh, I need this lengthy operating agreement. Sometimes if you're looking for funding, like a loan or something, that you might need to have that in place. But if you're just bootstrapping in the beginning, that's not something you need to necessarily worry about at the outset.
Okay, thank you. And Charlie, what don't we need? What are we okay with?
So two things. The first thing, just to echo Barbara's point when she was talking about opening up an LLC or your own corporate entity, you can actually insure that underneath your health coach liability insurance. There's no additional fee for that. So we don't charge anything extra for that. So if you are considering opening up your own legal entity, there's no additional costs for that. So don't have to worry about spending an exorbitant amount of money to cover your company. Then secondly, the big buzzword in insurance these days is cyber liability. And for a health coach, breaches of confidentiality, that's all covered underneath your professional liability insurance. So for a health coach, cyber liability isn't necessarily something you really need to worry about.
Charlie, does it cover all the content that, you see privacy policies on websites and things like that? Does it cover your website and the information on your website as well, or?
So typically our policies do, but some policies you also would have to get a general liability insurance, which is also privacy, copyright infringement, or even a general liability has your standard slip and fall coverage if you have an office premises. So in our policies it does, but general liability is something that you can look into as well.
Okay. And one other thing I want to point out from a tax standpoint, if you do set up an LLC and you're the sole member of that LLC, there's no special tax reporting that needs to be done, meaning you don't need a special entity return. You can still do that as a single member LLC on your individual return as you would if you were a sole proprietor. So you get, as Barbara said, the legal liability protection, but there's no added tax filings that you would need or separate entity tax filing that you would need.
Well, that's a great point. I didn't realize that at first either. So you'd think you have two separate tax.
Can I ask Michael a question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I get a lot of my coaching clients talking about wanting to form an S corp, which they can do from a tax standpoint, not a service corporation, but what the IRS deems an S corp for purposes of taxation. And I always, of course, tell them to talk to an accountant because they need to understand if that makes sense for their financial needs. Can you comment on that? I assume you get that question a lot. And when does it make sense to have that S corp status as part of your LLC?
Yeah, so there are two different things. You have the LLC, which generally would be considered a sole proprietorship from a tax standpoint, or you have an S corporation, which would require a separate filing. And it all depends. A lot of times, it mostly depends in the state tax area, because if you're an LLC or if you're an S corporation, those are considered from a tax standpoint flow through entities, meaning the entities don't pay taxes from a federal standpoint. It flows through to the individual return and you pay taxes on your individual return. Some states do tax S corporations where they would not tax an LLC. So it's talking to the clients, understanding where they're doing business and advising them from a tax standpoint, working with their legal counsel on what makes more sense, an S corporation or an LLC. From a liability perspective, and Barbara, I don't want to step on your toes on this, but from a liability perspective, they each have limited liabilities, whether you're an S corporation or an LLC. But it depends from a state perspective, mostly on what's the better entity to choose from a tax perspective.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I'm going to shift gears here for a second. Let's chat about the gig economy. So as a coach and you're running your business, oftentimes you need to just quickly hire somebody to do something for you because it's hard to be an expert in all things, right? So we tend to go on websites like Upwork and just quickly hire somebody to do a small task or a service. Talk to me about the pros and cons of that, or maybe the issues with those types of websites. I just know they're so common. So this is kind of an important area that coaches use. Maybe start with Michael. Any issues you see with those types of sites and hiring?
Yeah, I mean, depending on, the sites and who you're hiring, there's going to be some tax filings that might need to take place, whether it's, they're considered independent contractors and you need to file a form, which is called a Form 1099 at the end of the year so that you can report the payments that you've made to them. It also may require you to file in some different states that you normally wouldn't file in, depending on, what type of activities they're doing on your behalf. So again, before you start working or, engaging somebody on a website, it makes sense to think about what that means from a tax perspective. What additional filings is that going to require, and how is that going to, be reported from an income tax standpoint, and where do you need to file income tax returns?
Okay, thank you. Charlie, any thoughts on Upwork and the like?
Yeah, from a liability perspective, the policy is going to cover your company and yourself individually. So if there's a lawsuit named against your company or yourself individually, the policy is going to cover you. So really, if you're hiring somebody from the outside, it's not you're still covered underneath the policy. Now, the person that you're hiring might want to have their own policy to protect themselves for whatever they're doing. But in terms of you specifically, you're covered.
Okay, Barbara.
Well, I'll just comment. I mean, I think these services are really great for a lot of different types of small projects. You need somebody to do marketing or social media or low risk kinds of services. I think makes a lot of sense. But if you're looking at it to find a lawyer, for example, I don't actually haven't been on. I don't even know if lawyers legal services are part of the platform. I have no idea, but if they are, I would caution you. And I'm not saying this in self-interest. I just know from experience, there's not many lawyers who specialize in health and wellness law. There's lots of lawyers out there who do business law, can do contracts, can do estate planning and things like that. But you're probably going to be gravitating towards like a business lawyer, a general business lawyer.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, you're in an industry that is skating on the edge of a highly regulated industry, healthcare law.
Mhm.
And my experience with general business lawyers is that they have no idea, they don't have any training in what kind of pitfalls there are in working in that space. And I end up getting a lot of clients because their business lawyers just couldn't advise them properly on the specifics of the industry that they're working in. So just keep that in mind, because what's really going to protect you with these contracts that I talked about earlier that you need is the specific language that's directed at what you do for a living, which is, health and wellness coaching. And what is that? And how you differentiate that from a regulated profession is very
Right.
important, and it should be explicit in your contracts, because that's what's going to get you into trouble. And a general business lawyer is just not going to have an idea of how to do that, if that's even an issue, and then if they even understand that's an issue, how to articulate it in your contract.
Let's talk about that for what piece you said about being regulated. Can you tell me what you mean by a profession that's regulated versus health and wellness coaching not being regulated, just so we're clear?
Yeah. So what I said at the beginning, at the outset, is health coaching, no state issues any license for health coaching.
That's what you mean.
Not a licensed profession, but that some people want to change that, and that's a whole other discussion. But it's in contrast to physicians, nurses, acupuncture, chiropractic, even naturopaths. Not every state recognizes naturopaths, but a lot of them do. And physical therapists and massage therapists and counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists, social workers. They all have licenses issued by the state. They bill insurance, so they have those kinds of concerns, both contractually and with the federal level or the state insurance requirements for billing insurance. They are just inundated, let's just say. Also HIPAA, no question applies to what they do. And so they have from all different angles to navigate these different laws at the federal and state level. And coaches are kind of free to do free from the kinds of burdens, unless they start, crossing the line, like we talked about earlier, and especially with their scope. And so then they can run up against some of that regulation. And so it's really important for coaches to understand where that line is, which I think a lot of training programs do teach that portion of it, but then also to have that reflected accurately and comprehensively in your legal agreements, whether it's with a client, whether it's with a company. Those things are really important for your protection, and for your client's protection as well.
Okay, thank you. So it's rare we get a chance to have three experts kind of giving their opinion from the outside in. You guys see things that when you're in the discipline you don't necessarily see. So what would you say is something we should be talking about, or what is worrying you about the industry right now? Anything in particular? Michael, if you want to start us out.
Sure.
It's great. If there's nothing, that's great.
No. I mean, one of the things that you want to make sure of is that all of the proper filings are done from a tax standpoint, because that's the big worry, is making sure that you've been compliant with all the filings you need to, because that's where you can get into penalties. So we always work with our clients to make sure that they're doing the right filings. Most people think it's just income tax, but there are other filings, whether it's payroll taxes, providing independent contractors with the Form 1099s, whether it's sales tax filings. Even though it's a service, some states do, charge sales tax on services. So just making sure that everyone understands what their tax filings are. And that's the big thing is understanding what your tax filings are so you don't get yourself in trouble.
Okay, Charlie, what?
Yeah, and sort of to echo Barbara's point as well, I think it's very important to keep up to date with the current standards and researches for health coaches to make sure you're not overstepping your boundaries, because as I just want to reiterate that health coaching is an unregulated profession. So it's really important to make sure you're not stepping over different boundaries, because really anybody can hang a sign up and say that they're a health coach, but it is a real profession and you need to abide by the regulations.
And for you, Charlie, it's really about going out of your scope of practice. So you talked about less than 100 in 5 years, but in general, can you narrow that down? What really is the issue with that scope of practice? What's the main thing that gets reported? Or
Yeah, so there's a lot of professional WebMDers, as you know. So
okay.
people will go online. People will go online and look at the WebMD and start trying to diagnose for their clients,
Okay.
which is obviously outside the scope.
Mhm.
Psychologists will do the same thing, and yeah, it's really just make sure that you are staying on the straight and narrow and not jumping boundaries.
And making those referrals, right, when
Correct.
needed. Yeah.
Very
Okay,
important.
Barbara, what's scaring you right now with the industry? What are you concerned about?
I don't know about scaring. It's
Okay.
what I think is an interesting development that's starting to boil. I don't know, maybe we're not at a boil, maybe we're at just a simmer, but there's discussions going on about whether and when coaches will be able to bill insurance for their services, health coaches. And that for me is a fascinating discussion. I know there's been active efforts to get CPT codes assigned to health coaching. So that's the first step. Just because you get a CPT code, though, doesn't mean you're going to be able to bill insurance. And insurance companies as well, and public and private, whether we're talking Medicare, Medicaid, or United Healthcare or any of the other insurers, they have to decide whether they're going to cover through their policies health coaching services. The interesting aspect to that possibility is that should that happen, the upside is access from consumers will definitely increase, which is what everybody wants. I mean, everybody wants more access to coaching services because now they can actually have it covered through their insurance. But the downside of that, and I don't know how slippery this slope is, and I want to write some articles about this, is the regulation that will come with it inevitably. Because right now coaches, as we've been saying, aren't regulated, and that gives them a lot of freedom. A lot of freedom to practice nationally, internationally, even.
Yep.
And I have a lot of licensed healthcare providers, physicians, nurses, people who are subject to state regulation, trying to escape that kind of environment where they're being constantly bombarded with all the different red tape that they have to go through to deliver the services. So they're looking for an out, and coaching right now is one of those outs. And if we take that away, then we may be increasing access for the consumer, but we might be shooting ourselves in the foot for those who want an alternative to the licensed world. And so it's a fascinating dynamic that's happening. There's a lot of discussions going on, a lot of lobbying efforts going on. And I don't know if we've thought through all of the implications. So I'd love to be involved in more of those discussions.
Yeah, it's my understanding current state is the board announced that, so I'm referencing the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching, that they will be applying for CPT-1 codes with the VA, right? They're their co-applicator for 3 different types of codes: initial, ongoing session, and group coaching to Medicare in 2023. So they definitely are committed to submitting that application that year coming up here. So yeah, I think there's definitely so much more conversation to have around that. But
yes,
in terms of access, right? That's what it's exciting people in terms of access and being able customers or patients being able to access their insurance to
Yeah.
engage with a health coach. Yeah, for sure.
But I think Charlie, people like Charlie are going to have a little bit, have to reevaluate their policies even when that happens, because we're incurring, there's a lot more risks that goes in with when you start billing insurance and all that.
Absolutely, that's correct. And when you start billing insurance, all of a sudden it's a requirement to have liability insurance. So it's good to keep that in mind as well.
Good reminder. You can't just get away with no insurance, right?
Right.
You're billing.
Practice becomes more expensive. Practice will become more expensive because there's going to be a lot more infrastructure built around the coaching practice than there has to be right now. So those basics that we said or talked about earlier, things you might not need, all of a sudden you might need them. So
makes sense. All right, I would love to wrap up this session with any final thoughts, something you didn't get to say that you wanted to say or encourage. We'll start with you, Charlie, but final thoughts on the topic for today.
Yeah, thanks a lot so much for moderating this, and it's great to meet you, Michael, and Barbara, as well. Just a couple closing things as the insurance person. Just want to say to keep up to date with the current standards of health coaching practice. Make sure you're really staying in your scope. And then lastly, document everything. Make sure you really have client charts that are up to date, include all recommendation and treatment notes, because really that's going to help us and your attorneys, God forbid anything does come up with it. It's really important to keep those notes documented.
And Charlie, when you say stay in scope and you reference standards, you're referencing the National Board of Health and Wellness coaching standards. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, Barbara, final thoughts or something you didn't get to say today?
I guess I'll just repeat what I said at the outset, which was legal is often an afterthought when it comes to coaching, whether it's through training or when it's starting your own business. A lot of people just don't think about the legal side of things. And I would just promote the fact that legal should be an investment just like other aspects of your business, and finding an attorney that you can trust, that is familiar with what you do, I think is really important, because you feel like you have more of a partner then. And so I would just encourage you not to neglect that side of your business.
All right, Michael.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier and I'll mention it again, but it's very important to document everything from a tax standpoint. As Charlie said, when he was talking about insurance, to make sure you have the documentation, you need to do that from a tax standpoint so that you can build good books and records to prepare your tax returns. And then if there was ever any questions, where all the items of income and expense came from and how you got, the numbers you did and reported on your tax return. So good documentation, starting from the beginning, having the good documentation will help you from a tax standpoint.
And do you recommend, just to help somebody, keep that good documentation, to just create a separate account, even though they may not be an LLC or anything like that, but just have that separate account?
Have a separate business account. Don't commingle it with your personal account. Make sure that you can easily identify what's business and what's personal, because a lot of times if they get intermingled, the service, if it's the IRS or with state tax authorities, are going to question, whether it's a valid business expense. But if you have a separate account and it's just done for business, most times you can substantiate that it is a valid business expense.
That my first 2 years, I didn't do that. And I so regretted that, because the intermixing, when it came to tax time, oh my goodness, it was such a headache. So
trying to figure out which ones, which tax, which is going to individuals. Separate them. It makes it much easier when it comes time for taxes.
I'm going through my Amazon purchases and trying to figure out which is which, for sure. Well, Michael, Barbara, Charlie, I just want to thank you so much. This perspective is so valuable. I know as a health coach, maybe not the most exciting. I'd rather be coaching, like we said at the beginning, but essential. And I think, Barbara, you really made that point, that it's just so essential to be following the law, and Charlie, have insurance and make sure you document for your taxes. I think that's a good summary of today. At least get the basics we talked about with our first question. So I want to thank you all, and I want to thank the audience for attending a session and investing in this part of your business. And thank you to YourCoach. Providing a platform that kind of takes care of all of this for you is a pretty neat little thing. And I kind of wish I would have done that at the beginning too. So thank you all. Appreciate it and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.